Hi, welcome to the Jon Gaunt podcast, another one of my set piece interviews. Today, I'm delighted to say I'm going to be joined by somebody who I met before the Olympics were held in London. We've got a bit of a past, me and this guy. I'll tell you about that later in the interview. But his name is Lance Forman. He's the owner of Forman's Fish. You may have heard of them, probably the premier smoked salmon manufacturers in the country. And he's based on the Isle of Fish, conveniently. His name's Lance Forman. He joins me now. Good morning, Lance.
Good morning, John. It's been a while, but good to see you.
It has been a long time, yeah. I've got more grey hair. It's good to meet you again. Let's get talking then. Let's get talking. And the reason I wanted you particularly today is because of this breaking story about Keir Starmer. Obviously, there was the slur, and we'll talk about that in a moment, against Nigel Farage. But then there was the massive diversionary target, which was he's going to grant statehood, I suppose, to the Palestinian people if Israel don't do as he says. I don't know who the hell he thinks he is, but that's what he's laid down by September. What did you make of that?
Well, the way you phrased it, it sounds like he's sort of living in this colonial past, because Britain certainly doesn't have the right to grant statehood to anybody. In fact, we've just given away the Chagos Islands. So he just doesn't have the right to do it. It doesn't make any difference on the ground. Legally, he's, in terms of international law, what he's doing is just completely and utterly ridiculous. But we know the reason he is doing it, and it's not because of what's going on in the Middle East. It's purely about political posturing here in the UK, because he's losing votes, or his party's losing votes, certainly within the Muslim community, because he was trying to sort of maintain some kind of balance. But, we're sort of entering sectarian politics, which is not good, John.
Let's go on to that in a moment. But, of course, his backbenchers are in revolt over this. He's also got my MP for Gaza and Fossil Road in Coventry, Sarah Sultana and Corbyn. And it's got to be said, they've had a massive amount of people sign up to them. I know it's free, and that's a big difference.
Well, exactly. It's free. So, the numbers are,
the numbers are impressive, Lance. You can't argue. The numbers are impressive.
Well, they're reasonably impressive. It could be that some people are signing up because they just want to keep an eye on what they're doing. But the numbers, the numbers are quite big. But if you look at the certainly the Muslim population of the UK, we're at something like 6-7% of the UK. So many of those will have joined. And then, the hard left, there's always going to be a hard left faction in the UK too. They would have joined. So, yeah, if they reach the sort of numbers they reach, it doesn't surprise anyone. What it actually does do, the real effect of it, is that it splits the Labour vote. So, if you're a Conservative or in Reform, it's great. It's happy days.
There's a story today on the BBC website, and I think on GB News, well, no surprise there, that actually he could lose his seat to a Corbyn supporter. Does that make you smile?
Well, not particularly. I mean, I wouldn't really want a Corbyn supporter having a seat in Parliament, but there's not much difference at the moment.
Okay.
This government that we have are completely incompetent economically and on foreign policy too. They're just making a complete and utter hash of it. I know a number of people that voted Labour because they thought Starmer was a good guy and a safe pair of hands. And every single one of them have got buyer's remorse now, and they're absolutely devastated with what they did. And the sad thing is we've got another 4 years of this, unless some event happens, some sort of black swan event or whatever happens, which I suspect it could do, because we're not, the country's not in a happy state at the moment.
I think there's no chance he's going to last the whole 4 years. Him as an individual, whether the Labour government does is a separate matter. Well, then the Conservatives went through a load of leaders, didn't they? Ended up with a lettuce. So it can happen like that as well. Let's just go back to the statement yesterday. It's clear he didn't consult with Donald Trump, despite spending all that time with him, because when they interviewed Trump on the plane last night, Trump knew nothing about it and was just dismissive of it, a bit like you've been.
Well, I don't, it is ridiculous. He considers this to be the most important issue, and he's
Yeah,
recalled Parliament or recalled, his party in
cabinet.
this sort of Cobra meeting, whatever meeting they had to discuss it. If it was that important, and yet he just met with the leader of the free world the day before and didn't have the gall to mention it, it just shows how weak he is. He sat there for an hour while Trump spouted off on climate change, on inheritance tax, on immigration, and basically gave Keir Starmer a masterclass on these issues. And Starmer sat there silently, apart from the one moment where he did pop up and sort of say, Sadiq Khan or Sir Sadiq Khan is my friend, when Donald Trump had completely slated him.
What was great about that was the way that Trump didn't give a shit, did he? He just said, just repeated it. He's a very nasty man,
Well, he's ruined London, and I have sympathy with Donald Trump on that front. But Keir Starmer took a political beating from Donald Trump, and I'm sure he was petrified to mention this. In case Trump might have, who knows how Trump might have reacted. He might have decided to chuck our trade deal, throw it up in the air. And Keir Starmer, he's just so bad. And I don't know whether he just doesn't have any moral compass. He doesn't believe in anything. But he is just the weakest possible leader. And, everybody in the country knows it. It's embarrassing.
That's absolutely true. He's the most unpopular one now on record, and that was before the meeting with Trump. I just think it made our country, I think we just got humiliated. I think Trump was playing a master plan, as you say, of diplomacy, being really nice and chummy, but every statement was putting him down, whether it was the so-called windmills, whether it was baby frack, whether it was immigration. I thought the immigration stuff was great. And then, of course, the kick-in of Khan, then I would agree with it. But
there's one other sense that I did get, which doesn't relate to Starmer, that came out of that meeting, is that obviously we had a meeting before that one where Trump met Ursula von der Leyen, the head of the EU, and he's negotiated an absolutely cracking trade deal for the USA.
Yeah.
And what it sort of did, when you listened and watched, you just thought, well, why didn't we negotiate that sort of deal for ourselves when we left the EU? Precisely. And again, it's, yes, Labour are terribly weak, but there has been weak leadership throughout our entire political class. We need to do better.
And of course, you were a Reform MEP at one point. I want to go on to that in a moment. But what did you make of this attack on Nigel Farage yesterday, saying he loves Jimmy Savile, effectively? I mean, I thought it was below the belt. I thought it was ridiculous. But I'm clever enough to know that was a diversion tactic. The idea was to get the press talking about that. Nigel didn't really rise to the bait. He didn't threaten to sue. And then, of course, they had the other masterstroke, which was to say they were going to give the Palestine, they were going to reward terrorism. That's what they've done. Let's not beat about the bush. There are still well over 20 Israeli kids and young people held hostage. We don't know if they're alive or dead. And that's on top of the people who they savagely, barbarically killed on that day in October.
Yeah, well, it obviously the comment with Savile was distasteful and totally out of order, and they really ought to apologise for that. That was, it was just very distasteful, actually, and totally unfair. Because the Reform Party, all the political parties want to make sure that kids are protected. That doesn't mean that we're anti-free speech. We believe in free speech, but yes, of course, you still need to protect kids. You can separate these two issues. On the Israel front, it's just again absolutely disgusting. He's just rewarded Hamas for October the 7th. There is one of the hostages, one of the living hostages still in Gaza, has a British mother, and they were assured by Starmer that they will do everything to make sure those hostages will be released safely. And what he's done is completely the opposite. He's basically said that unless Israel makes a ceasefire, which they've already agreed to. It's Hamas that refused to go ahead with the ceasefire that was proposed by America in Qatar, and the Qatari support, the American support. Hamas were the ones that refused to move forward with it. But they say that if Israel doesn't go ahead with a ceasefire, then they're going to recognize the state. Well, that basically put all the cards with,
Yes.
we basically give them the four aces or the royal flush to Hamas. I mean, it's just, it's totally immoral and completely incompetent. I just don't know where to go with it. It's so bad. I just don't know what to say.
Why didn't he put a condition in saying this is all conditional on Hamas releasing every single hostage? Lots of the newspapers and commentators are saying that
That might have been the sensible thing. But even so, there's no one in Israel that believes that a two-state solution is the solution now. Gaza was given, it was handed over to the Palestinians in 2005. They were given everything, the agriculture, the greenhouses. Israel was previously doing billions of dollars worth of trade with all their fruits and vegetables out of Gaza. It was handed to them on a plate. Every single Israeli citizen was removed from Gaza. They even removed Jewish cemeteries, and took the dead bodies back into Israel so that it would be complete. This could have been a model state. So they had the opportunity to do it. And what did they do? Well, within no time at all, Hamas took control. They were elected. And they basically made the whole place into a terrorist state. They invested in tunnels. You've got a bigger tunnel network there than the London Underground. And they brought rockets in. And they had effectively an independent state as what could have been a model, what should have been a model. So to reward them with this now, it's just idiotic.
Well, you say that, but when you see those starving babies or you see the people starving, I know the publicity is controlled by Hamas as well, but it's got to affect you. You're a father. I can't look at that and think, well, that's okay. I want that solved. I don't want people starving to death in 2025. Do you?
No, of course not. Nobody wants to see starving babies other than Hamas. Hamas use starving babies as their PR, and the BBC are their partners in this whole thing. If they thought that the BBC and other global media channels wouldn't show photographs of starving babies or injured babies, they wouldn't be able to use that human shield strategy as part of their form of attack. That's why they do it, because they know the Western media buys into it. So Hamas have got to go. And yes, there could be a Palestinian state, but it's not going to happen immediately. There need to be a number of conditions that need to take place beforehand. So the first thing is, every single Palestinian now under the age of 20 has basically been educated by Hamas, educated in UN schools to hate Jews, to want to murder Jews, and and basically to take over Israel. They basically want to not only destroy the Jewish state, in their charter, they actually want to kill Jews across the planet. So the first thing you have to do is you have to de-radicalize them. They have to be, basically, all that indoctrination they had has to be removed from their brains. The second thing you need to do is you need to demilitarize Gaza and Palestine in exactly the same way as Germany was demilitarized. American forces were placed into Germany. We need to do the same. They must not be allowed to have their own military until such time in the future. It could take a generation, maybe 2 generations, until we know they are no longer jihadists and want to live in peace with their neighbors. Then there's another thing. They currently call for a right of return for refugees. Again, this is nonsense. You've got people like sort of billionaires like Bella Hadid's dad, who is a refugee. He's defined as a refugee. This is absolute and utter nonsense. So this whole idea that Palestinians should be able to return to Israel, again, that needs to go out the window. And of course, you need full recognition of Israel by the Palestinians. Once those conditions are met, and I would say it'll probably take 25 to 30 years, but if there's a commitment to move down that road, then everybody can build confidence together, and yeah, you'll have a Palestinian state.
And of course, we've not had any elections, have we, since the Hamas have been in power for 14 or 15 years? Is that correct?
Well, terrorist groups generally don't believe in democracy. So, why would you have elections?
Okay, so why here in the West, and I don't need to tell you this, you're a Londoner, why have they been on the streets of London, and why are so many young people, particularly on the left here, supporting them, chanting things like "from the river to the sea," defacing our monuments, wrecking our streets? I'm told by some Jewish friends, you could tell me better as you are Jewish, that people are afraid to go into town, into London on a Saturday or Sunday when these protests are on. Just how bad is you got to say both, haven't you? It's anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, and anti-Jewish feeling, or anti-Semite feeling at the moment. And are those things all mixed in, if you get what I'm talking about?
They are mixed in, and people fall into different categories. So at those marches, you will have, they will be led by people that are, pro-Hamas,
sure,
not pro-Palestine, because, there were tens of thousands of Palestinians murdered by Syria, by the Assad regime. They never went out to protest then. These people are not, and they're not pro-Palestinian. They are anti-Israel. So you have people, and same with this whole issue of starvation. Many, many more people, by a huge factor, are dying of starvation in Sudan. Where are the marches? Where are the complaints? Where's the social media on it? You don't see any of it. It all comes back to hatred for Israel, and
hatred of Israel or hatred of Jews in general.
Well, the two are totally interchangeable, quite frankly. And Israel, and again, one of the reasons I'm sort of moving slightly off topic, but one of the reasons why there's been a hatred of Israel is because Israel has been delegitimized in the media, and particularly by the BBC, over 25 to 30 years. Sure. This has been a drip feed of anti-Israel delegitimization. The Foreign Office too have been at it to quite a great extent. And now I think it's infiltrated much further in the Home Office to some extent, possibly even in the police. But why do people go on these marches? Yes, so you've got the hardcore that are very anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, want to do everything they can to sort of spread that message. Then you've got a lot of what we call useful idiots, people that don't know any better, and they're probably the same sort of lefties that go on the Extinction Rebellion marches, Just Stop Oil, Black Lives Matter, and it's just part of this whole sort of lefty cause. And they've been told that Israel's a colonialist state, where actually it's the opposite of that. That there was colonial, Israel was, this is the ancestral homeland. So you've got people like that. But from a political perspective, I wouldn't say that Keir Starmer and David Lammy are anti-Semitic. I wouldn't claim that. But I think their actions align with the actions of people that are anti-Semitic. And for them, it's all down to, local politics and wanting to maintain the Muslim vote. And I think that is the problem there.
We've had the banning of the Palestinian mob just recently. Do you think that should have happened earlier? Do you think that was too draconian? Do you think they should have been tougher on the marches? Do you think there has been two-tier policing when it comes to this particular issue?
Yeah, I think to some extent the Tories were to blame for allowing these marches to be as frequent as they were, but also Sadiq Khan, of course, because he has, it's unclear who has the real power to allow these things to happen, whether it's the Home Office or the Mayor of London. But the problem is that you've let the anti-Semitic genie out the bottle. That is the problem, and getting it back now is very challenging. And these marches just did not have to happen every single week, and it is very difficult and very painful for Jewish people, as you mentioned. And the biggest conversation in the Jewish community at the moment, and I see it on tons of WhatsApp groups, the biggest conversation is, how much longer do you think we've got in the UK?
Well, there's a real fear that Jews have to leave. Yeah,
there's a very strong feeling that there's no long-term future for Jewish people in the UK. There's a very strong feeling. I'm not making that up. It's not a threat. It's just how it is. And the reason why that is such a strong feeling is because we've all learnt the lesson from history. Jewish people were very integrated in German society in the early 30s. And when the Nazis started to sort of seek, and take power, a lot of those German Jews were saying, oh, it's all okay, it's going to blow over, nothing's going to happen to us. And 10 years later, they were all sent to gas chambers and gassed to death. Half of my family, my dad is a Holocaust survivor. Half his family were literally wiped out in the gas chambers. So we look at what's going on now, it's starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable. And it's not that everybody, we're not saying everyone's a hater, but the problem is if you're silent in the face of this,
sure,
you're allowing it to happen. And that's what's happened. The government should have clamped down on it on day one, but they haven't. They've allowed this genie out the bottle. The thing's spreading. People are much more brazen. They were saying, oh, no, it's not about Jews, it's about Israel. But now there's a lot of hatred coming out towards Jews too.
You were very careful.
The lesson of history is don't leave it too long before you leave.
You were very careful to state that you didn't think that Starmer or Lammy were anti-Jewish or anti-Semite. What about Khan?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know him personally, but I don't know. I honestly don't know. There are Jewish people that I know that say he's not, but his actions have certainly not endeared himself. He's been. I think I vaguely recall him making some sort of quite unfair comment regarding the chief rabbi. I might have got that wrong, but it's somewhere in the back of my head. But
okay,
I'll tell you what I do think. I mean, there's a media presenter that I'm sure you're well aware of. He's now sort of on the international stage, Mehdi Hassan.
Yeah, I know Mehdi. I've done lots of TV with him. Go on.
Have you? So he wrote an article back in 2013 in the New Statesman, and these are his words, John. He said that anti-Semitism in the Muslim community in Britain, obviously, is, and these are his words, inverted commas, our dirty little secret, right? Now, that's what he said. Now, it is rife within the Muslim community. And what really bugs me is that no one wants Islamophobia. Of course we don't. We don't want any hatred of anybody. But why are we focusing so much on protecting against Islamophobia when that community itself is hateful or anti-Semitic? My view is we should be saying to these people, get your own house in order first before you want protection yourself.
So therefore, you don't think there needs to be a new definition of Islamophobia, obviously?
Oh, it's just nonsense. It's just, again, it's nonsense. Every step of what they do, and it's the same in Israel, that they constantly try to mirror the persecution that Jewish people have faced. And using the same words and same terminology for themselves. So anti-Semitism, we have to have Islamophobia. The worst genocide that's ever happened in human history, the Holocaust, they now want to claim that there's a genocide.
I hate them doing that.
They now talk about it as a Holocaust and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Okay. So there's no chance, as far as you can see, that at this United Nations, they are going to be recognised, because the most powerful man in the world, Donald Trump, isn't going to agree to that, is he?
Well, it's even if Donald Trump did agree to it, which he won't, because he just won't, because he's one of the few people that actually understands the situation. It's almost irrelevant. You're recognizing something. Who is the leader of the Palestinians? Is it Hamas or is it the Palestinian Authority? None of these guys have been elected for the last 20 years, although many nations, if not most nations in the UN, aren't actually democracies. What are the boundaries of this state? If you actually go back to, people talk about the Balfour Declaration, when the Ottoman Empire was falling apart in the First World War, and Britain was given a mandate to manage Palestine. Palestine was all supposed to be allocated for resettlement by Jewish people. And indeed, many had been there for decades. Jerusalem's had a Jewish majority since the 1840s. But it was all supposed to be for Jewish for a Jewish state. 78% of it was carved out and made Jordan. Jordan is every bit as much Palestine as Israel is Palestine. right at that in that early days in the 1920s, Jordan was given over to the Arabs as a Palestinian state. So they already are. People talk about a two-state solution. There actually already is a two-state solution. 80-90% of the population of Jordan are Palestinians. Their queen is a Palestinian. We could actually very easily solve this and just say, look, Palestinians live in Jordan, Jews live in Israel. End of. We could do that, but
All right, let's move on from that if we can for a moment, because I did mention the slur against Nigel Farage. You're one of the people who've worked with him. You did leave the Brexit Party, I seem to recall.
Yeah.
Is he an egomaniac? Is he going to be the next Prime Minister? Maybe both those things are mutually compatible. I don't know. How did you find him to work with?
Look, he is without any question whatsoever. He's the best communicator out there.
Yep.
He is a great communicator, and he gets to the heart of any message.
Yep.
And he understands things, and he identifies issues well before they become issues. And it's whole
he did that with the small boats, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. He's been doing it for years. And so he does have this extraordinary talent that other politicians don't have. He's also extraordinarily charismatic.
Yeah.
Historically, his experience of working with other people has not been so good. It's not been so good. But who knows? Maybe he's maturing now. The fact that, he is sort of building a team, and Zia Yusuf is building a team around him, maybe he's changing. Maybe now that he knows that there is a possibility of actual leadership, maybe he is changing. I'm not saying, people can change their characters, but, you do learn, and, we all mature and sort of change. So I don't know. Maybe he can do. However, concerns I have are not so much with him and his personality. It's more with actually the economics, because I don't think there's a coherent strategy on the economics. So I'm a sort of old-fashioned free market sort of Thatcherite libertarian, and I look at some of the policies that they're coming up with, and nationalisation and the removing the 2-child parent cap and welfare and no tax under £20,000, and I just think that, to me, this doesn't make any sense at all. So I have I did leave the Brexit Party as it was and moved back to the Tories, very disillusioned that with Boris, and the fact that I feel he sort of squandered this huge opportunity that Britain had for a reset. But I do like Kemi, and I think she's superb. But I do think also, it's very early days. People are saying reform are going to work. We're 3 years off potentially. But my view is that that they are probably going to need each other at some stage, and the time will come when they'll both be looking at the polls and thinking, we can't make this alone, and some kind of deal will need to be cut. That's my view now, but it could evolve. You're
listening to the Jon Gaunt Show. I'm talking to Lance Forman. Let's just quickly then I want to go back to Starmer. He's made this big announcement yesterday. He had his cabinet meeting, emergency cabinet meeting. I said on Twitter, and I stand by it, he should have been having a cabinet meeting about the migrant hotel crisis. He should have been having a cabinet meeting about, the Muslim rape gangs. And today we hear the police are involved as well. There's accusations of serving police officers. I mean, he's not really getting to the core of it. You've just mentioned the economy and the rest of it. Why can't the mainstream politicians see that Farage, I know he's a populist, but he's a populist because he's talking about the things that really concern people. And there is so much upset in the community, especially when people like Starmer accused everybody after Southport of being a far-right thug. They weren't all far-right thugs. In fact, the vast majority were just Scousers.
Yeah. Well, that's why Nigel Farage and the Reform Party are doing so well in the polls at the moment, and that's why Keir Starmer is doing so badly and is, considered to be the worst leader we've ever had in living memory.
Can Keir Starmer pull it back?
He'll never be able to put it back. I mean, he knows he's finished, and that's quite dangerous too, because now, he might do things, because he knows whilst he still has his majority, he might try and get away with things that are unpopular just because it's, a scorched earth policy. There's no way Labour are going to get it back. And now that Labour are split with Corbyn and Sultana, there's even less chance. Sure. So that's just not going to happen.
Now, you are a very, very experienced businessman. We all know that. And that's the problem, I guess, with Labour. There's nobody who's been involved in business. The Conservatives, it's not like it used to be. You used to have lots of small business type people involved. Yeah. There's a lack of that expertise within all of the parties. And so, so who's looking after business? My mate's got a hotel, and he just said, Starmer's constantly bragging, we upped the minimum wage. Well, no, you didn't. He's having to pay it, or the NI, and all the rest of it. That's just a ludicrous situation we're in. And so, is there anyone that you could look at and think, oh, that could pull it round? That's what we need to do. Because everybody's skint, Lance. Everybody is skint.
They are. I mean, look, it's not only are the Labour Party completely incompetent and have no knowledge of how to pull this round, because they have no commercial experience. Yeah. You've got exactly the same problem with the civil service. They don't really fully understand the impact of the decisions they make. No, they don't understand what people want either. I mean, none of them do. When I go back to the Brexit vote in 2016, the entire political class was saying to the British population, "This is a bad idea." The entire media class was saying to the public, "This is a bad idea," and the public just said, "You know what? We don't agree with you. We want this." And what they wanted, yes, we can argue about whether they wanted sovereignty or immigration, all these things, but what they really wanted was change. They were basically fed up with the way our country's been run for the last 25, 30 years, and they wanted change. It wasn't working for them. They wanted change, and we're not getting that change. So you've got a problem with politicians. You've got a problem with the civil service, and also the media. The media don't really understand. A lot of these journalists don't understand it either. They're sort of in this same sort of bubble, and they don't really understand the impacts of some of the decisions that are being made. We do need to get business people into decision-making positions in government. Because ultimately everything, John, comes back to business.
It does.
If you want a good health service, you want good education, you want strong defence, it has to be paid for. And unless you have the tax revenues, which means you need a successful economy, it's just not going to happen. So everything comes back to business.
I always make the point as well that the politicians and the media, the established media, what I call the lamestream media, they're in bed with each other, literally and metaphorically, when actually the relationship between the media and a politician should be that of a dog and a lamppost. But they've forgotten that. And as you say, then there's no real business experience within that. So no one's challenging them. And then that's how you end up with Rachel Thieves as the Chancellor, isn't it? And then her crying in the House of Commons.
Yeah, no, they just don't. They really don't have a clue. They thought, well, they just think if you put the tax rate up, you'll raise more tax. If I put the price of my smoked salmon up, I won't sell more smoked salmon, I won't increase my turnover. People will think, you know what, it's expensive enough as it is. I'll buy less of it. It's the same with tax. People have choices. When they put up capital gains tax, people thought, well, I won't sell my shares now, or sell my assets, I'll hang on to them. And therefore they raise less capital gains tax. Same with national insurance. If you put up the cost of employing people, businesses will employ fewer people. Yeah. And what they don't understand, or never understood, it's not, the national insurance hike, which is hugely damaging to business across the UK, is actually a double whammy. It's not just, we're not just having to put, or we're not facing just our employment costs going up, but every single input cost that we have, every single supplier of ours has put their prices up because they needed to cover their own labour costs going up. So it's inflationary, it's a double whammy. They don't understand this. And what they should be doing is reducing taxes, scrapping regulations, and it's not complicated. If you want to get an economy going, it's actually really simple. Two things: lower taxes, scrap regulations,
and control immigration.
Well, that's not.
You sound like like a Donald Trump mini-me there, because that's basically what he told Starmer.
It's basic stuff. I'm MA in economics from Trinity College, Cambridge. A good degree in the subject, but it's not. You don't even need the degree. It's just common sense. If you've been in business, and you're having to make decisions in your business, and the impact of those decisions based on tax codes and tax rules, which you do. They affect your decisions, and these people that have never run a business don't understand it, and it's just depressing actually that there's so little knowledge.
Obviously, you're involved in the hospitality industry, selling the salmon. How bad is it in London in particular at the moment? I mean, is it dying on its feet like we keep getting told?
The hospitality industry is in a really tough place at the moment. It's a really tough place. I sometimes drive into London and into central London, and actually it seems really quiet. I don't know, tourists aren't coming here either, because possibly because of these regular marches. People are scared off. But just getting into London now, congestion charges and ULEZ charges, and if you wanted to drive into London for a dinner, you sort of pretty much got to pay 50 quid for your ULEZ, your congestion, and your parking before you've even started the first cocktail. It's very, very expensive now. So I can't see any positive signs at all. From our perspective as a business, the only way that I can look at this with a positive spin is that when you're in business, you're competing against other people in a similar business, and whilst you can't change the rules of the game because the government changed the rules, you're probably better at playing the game than your competitors, and it's survival of the fittest. And we've been around in business, 120 years. We've been through world wars and depressions and recessions and so on, and we know what we need to do, and that's what we do. But it is, business is a game, but for the economy as a whole, what this government are doing is very destructive.
Why didn't Brexit work?
Because it wasn't ever implemented. I mean, that's that's the tragedy of it all.
Whose fault's that?
Whose fault? Well, Theresa May, I would say, David Cameron should never have resigned. He should have seen it through. But when he did resign, Theresa May had an opportunity. The country had been divided on Europe for about 30 years. There were some people that were very pro the EU. There were some people that were increasingly Eurosceptic. And a decision was made that we would have a referendum, and rather than have this constant division, we would just have a referendum and we would decide, and we would go with whichever side.
And he would stick with it. Yeah.
And we would stick with it. And we had the referendum, and Leave lost. And instead of Theresa May saying, right, we're now going to leave and let's do the best leaving we can possibly do the Donald Trump deal that he's just done with us, which is what we should have done. Instead of that, she said, oh no, the country's very divided. Let's try and bring everybody back together again, and try and it was just ridiculous.
Okay.
She just and she didn't understand it because she was on the wrong side of it. It should have taken a Brexiteer to lead the country, somebody that sort of believed passionately in this, because it's what the people voted for. Would it have been magnificent had it happened? I think it would have been very good for the economy. What we've got ourselves into a situation now is that it's not as bad. There are all those scare stories, the sun wasn't going to shine, the grass wasn't going to grow. That hasn't happened. It hasn't been a disaster.
Yeah, but also we haven't had the sunny uplands either, have we?
Well, exactly. So it hasn't been great, and it hasn't been a disaster either. It's been pretty neutral. Our economy, actually, if you compare the British economy, which is awful, to the German economy since the date of the referendum, we've actually grown faster than Germany. So, it hasn't been a disaster. And also, do you remember we spent months arguing about this £39 billion exit fee? People saying, how can we pay 39 billion to the EU just to leave? It's a waste of money. We spent months arguing over that. COVID came along afterwards, and we were spending 50 billion pounds every single month on furlough. So, COVID completely put this whole argument into perspective. It was relatively small. It hasn't been a disaster for the UK that we've left. It hasn't been great because we haven't seized the advantages of it. But we're in a position too, when we do eventually get a government that does believe in it.
And also, we've got a brilliant trade deal, better than the EU, with Donald Trump. Just before you go though, just tell me, have you got any optimism? Are we ever going to see a sunny upland again?
Well, we did see. We had a nice.
But let's not go down
there.
there.
We had a nice summer weather-wise.
I
do think optimism. God, that's difficult with yesterday's announcement. But I do think we're hitting peak woke, and I do think we're hitting peak net zero. I think that people are waking up and realizing that it makes sense to have cheap energy if we want to grow our economy, and actually maybe that is more important than trying to save the Maldives from sinking in 300 years' time, even if you believe that's going to happen, which it isn't, because the Maldives are actually growing. But I think people are waking up to this. How sacrificial do we want to be? And we have, if we drill baby drilled, as Donald Trump says, if we frack baby fracked in the UK, there are estimates that we have enough shale gas literally under our feet to wipe off our entire national debt. I mean, that is just extraordinary. And we're literally standing here looking at it saying, oh, there's all that treasure under there. Nah, let's just leave it there. It's ridiculous. So many of these scare stories on all the net zero stuff, a lot of it's been, politically driven even by Russia. It's Russia that didn't want us to frack because they didn't want us to be energy independent. They wanted us to be dependent on UK oil. There was a great story which you might have caught a few weeks back. It was at the time when Israel did the air attack on Iran.
Yeah.
Now, this may seem a bit unrelated, but Scotland gets tons and tons of, the Scottish independence gets tons of sort of, media coverage on all this sort of social media stuff. For 24 hours, Iran lost all its internet connections. It just lost everything.
Incredible.
In that same 24 hours that Iran lost its internet, all of the publicity promoting Scottish independence went dead. It was just, and nobody believes it's a coincidence. It's just, bot farms, it's these sort of computerized bot farms in Iran. They're trying to sort of, dismantle Western society. And then whether it's, by doing all these things, Scottish independence, the Russians doing it with climate change and so on. This is a sort of Marxist attack on Western society.
And finally, Trump, despite all his problems, the Epstein stories that keep coming up, do you think he's a force for good, for not just for Britain, but indeed for the world?
I absolutely do. I think his, I think the decision, you've got to take his personal life out of it. And I'm not interested in his personal life. I often say, if your house is burning down and a fireman sort of comes to sort it out, could you care less whether he's having an affair or it's irrelevant? If he puts the fire out, that's what counts. Donald Trump is, he, in my view, his heart's in the right place. His strategy, his economic strategy, is right for the USA and for the world. And he's, having Donald Trump is almost like pressing the reset button. He totally understands the Middle East. And he is the master of negotiation. Look at what he just did with Europe. It just shows, it doesn't just show what a good negotiator he is, it just shows what bad negotiators they are. Sure. But, I think that, he is, he's definitely on the right side of the ledger for the future of humanity.
Well, I agree with you, actually. So thanks very much indeed. Lance Forman from Forman Fish. Thanks very much indeed for joining me today. What did you make of that? You can put comments, if you fancy, at the bottom of this YouTube video. If you're listening on a podcast, on just an audio, you can get in touch with me via Twitter, via Facebook, or just come across to YouTube. Remember, the YouTube channel is Jon Gaunt TV. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you for spreading the word. It's so important. Thank you very much indeed. Don't forget, I'm back tonight, as every night, Monday to Thursday at 6:30 for the live show, which is a bit more of a rough and tumble. But Lance Forman, thank you for joining me today. You've been watching the Jon Gaunt Show. And remember, if you've got kids, give them a kiss, give them a hug. Hey, hey, hey. Don't forget to tell them you love them. See ya.